And there was so much arrogance. I mean, they didn't need to spend that much money on a house. They didn't need a house that big. But they genuinely believed they were never going to have to worry for money again.
$14,650,000. That is what Prince Harry and Meghan Markle paid for their Montecito mansion back in 2020. And according to royal biographer Angela Levin, that property has become a prison on so many levels. The couple who once promised to change philanthropy while living their best lives in sunny California now finds themselves trapped in a gilded cage of their own making. The running costs alone are estimated in the tens of millions annually when you factor in security, housing expenses, and the endless legal fees Harry continues to rack up in his quixotic battles against British tabloids. Reports suggest Harry barely leaves the house anymore, wandering the halls of a home that was supposed to represent freedom but has instead become a monument to miscalculation. Let me be clear about what we are witnessing here. This is not a temporary setback or a rough patch that any couple might endure. This is the systematic unraveling of what was supposed to be the greatest reinvention in modern royal history. When Harry and Meghan departed the United Kingdom in early 2020, they carried with them the absolute certainty that the world would pay handsomely for their presence, their opinions, and their carefully curated brand of progressive royalty. They genuinely believed they could command Netflix-level fees while producing content that satisfied their humanitarian self-image rather than audience expectations. The arrogance of that assumption is only now becoming fully apparent.
She spends money like water, really. £4,000 for a dress or, a handbag or something like that. She's just eating away at money.
The mansion itself tells the story better than any financial document could. 9 bedrooms, 16 bathrooms, a tea house, a children's cottage, rose gardens, and every luxury amenity imaginable. They purchased this property during the height of their earning potential, flush with the confidence that came from signing deals with Netflix and Spotify worth over $100 million combined. What they failed to understand, and what reality has since made painfully clear, is that those deals required them to actually produce content that people wanted to consume. The house remains, the income streams have largely dried up, and the monthly bills keep arriving with the same relentless consistency. Angela Levin's description of the property as a prison operates on multiple levels that deserve examination. There is the obvious financial prison, the reality that selling the house would be an admission of defeat they cannot bring themselves to make. There is the geographic prison, the fact that Meghan has effectively isolated Harry from everyone and everything he once knew on the other side of the Atlantic. And there is the psychological prison, the dawning recognition that the freedom they sought has transformed into a different kind of captivity, one where every public appearance feels desperate, and every business venture carries the stench of declining relevance. Harry reportedly spends his days in this massive estate with little to occupy his time and fewer people to share it with. The man who once enjoyed the camaraderie of military service, the purpose of royal engagements, and the simple pleasure of being near family and friends now exists in a kind of luxurious limbo. The irony would be almost poetic if it were not so genuinely sad. He traded a life of structured meaning for unstructured emptiness, and the sprawling grounds of his California compound offer no answers to the questions that must keep him awake at night. What happens when the money runs out entirely, and who will be left standing beside him when it does? Angela Levin has studied Harry for years, written his biography, and watched his transformation with the kind of close attention that breeds genuine insight. Her assessment is worth considering carefully. She describes Meghan as someone who spends money like water, dropping £4,000 on a dress here, acquiring expensive handbags there, maintaining a lifestyle that assumes the income will always be sufficient to support it. The fundamental problem is that Meghan expected to marry a billionaire.
I hear he's very concerned that they are spending too much, but Meghan won't cut down spending because she won't. So it's back to his father and to try and get some money.
According to multiple sources close to the situation, she was very disappointed to discover that Harry was merely a millionaire, and a millionaire with expensive tastes, ongoing legal costs, and diminishing earning potential at that. This disconnect between expectation and reality sits at the heart of everything that has gone wrong in Montecito. Meghan arrived in that relationship with a clear vision of the life she wanted to lead, the influence she expected to wield, and the resources she assumed would be available to fund her ambitions. Harry, for all his genuine wealth by normal standards, was never going to be the bottomless financial resource she apparently imagined. His inheritance from Princess Diana, his allowance from Prince Charles, his various investments, these were large sums that would allow most people to live comfortably for multiple lifetimes. They were not, however, sufficient to sustain the kind of existence Meghan seems to believe she deserves. Reports indicate that Harry has become very concerned about the rate at which money is leaving their accounts. He watches the spending continue while the income contracts, and his concerns are apparently met with resistance rather than reconsideration. Meghan, according to sources familiar with the household dynamics, simply won't cut down on her expenditures. The designer clothes keep arriving, the staff salaries keep being paid, the lifestyle maintenance continues unabated, all while the gap between income and outgo widens with each passing month. This is the financial equivalent of a slow-motion car crash, visible to everyone except the people behind the wheel. The champagne taste on a beer budget comparison feels almost too generous at this point. What we are actually witnessing is champagne taste on a budget that is actively contracting, a lifestyle predicated on income levels that no longer exist and may never return. Harry's inheritance from Diana was reportedly around £10 million. His allowance from Charles, which continued for some time after Megxit, has apparently been reduced or eliminated entirely. The Netflix deal that once seemed like a lifeline has produced diminishing returns with each successive project, and the Spotify partnership ended in mutual disappointment. The math simply does not work, and at some point mathematical reality will override whatever denial mechanisms have kept them going this long.
Harry was charging $50K to $100K per speaking engagement, and now he is charging as little as $325. Oh, how the mighty have fallen because he don't have no job. None of these people work.
The question that hangs over all of this is whether Meghan is capable of the kind of adjustment that their circumstances now require. Everything we know about her suggests a personality that does not respond well to constraint, limitation, or the suggestion that she might need to modify her expectations. She built her entire public persona around the idea that she deserved more than life was giving her, that the obstacles she faced were always someone else's fault, and that her eventual triumph was simply a matter of finding the right platform and the right partner. Having finally acquired what she believed was the ultimate platform and partner, the discovery that even these were insufficient must be deeply destabilizing. So what happens when a prince who was once charging $50,000 to $100,000 per speaking engagement finds himself accepting gigs for as little as $325? That is apparently where Harry now finds himself, according to multiple reports about his current speaking circuit strategy. The desperation embedded in that price drop tells you everything you need to know about how far the Sussex brand has fallen. This is not a strategic repositioning or a deliberate choice to reach wider audiences. This is a man scrambling to generate any income he can from the only asset he still possesses, his name and his willingness to stand behind a podium and talk about himself. The speaking engagement situation has taken on an almost surreal quality with Harry's announcement as a keynote speaker at the International Association of Privacy Professionals Global Summit. Let that sink in for a moment. The man who wrote a tell-all memoir exposing intimate family secrets, who participated in multiple documentary series revealing private royal matters, who has monetized his personal grievances more thoroughly than perhaps anyone in modern history, will be lecturing professionals about privacy. Tom Sykes drew the obvious comparison to the infamous South Park episode that mocked Harry and Meghan's privacy tour, noting that Harry is literally offering an open goal to critics who argue that accepting fees to speak at a profit-driven conference sits uneasily with his long-stated insistence on personal privacy. The irony compounds when you consider what was happening at the exact same time Harry was testifying in London about the damage caused by having his life commoditized. While he sat in court lamenting how the press had exploited his personal information, Meghan was back in California posting photographs of him and their children on social media. She was quite literally commoditizing their family life to bolster their public profile and commercial brand, while he complained about others doing something similar. The lack of self-awareness would be almost impressive if it were not so transparently hypocritical, and the fact that neither of them seems to recognize the contradiction suggests a disconnect from reality that should concern anyone who cares about their well-being. Sykes invoked the comparison to the Duke of Windsor, who after his abdication spent much of his later life traveling and speaking for fees alongside Wallace Simpson. The parallel is uncomfortable but increasingly apt. Edward VIII gave up his throne for the woman he loved and spent the subsequent decades in a kind of purposeless exile, trading on his former status to maintain a lifestyle he could no longer officially afford. Harry has not technically abdicated anything, but he has voluntarily removed himself from the institution that gave his life meaning and structure, and the results look remarkably similar. The drift and grift narrative that Sykes identified is taking hold, and Harry seems powerless to change the trajectory. The speaking circuit represents Harry's last reliable income stream, and even that is showing signs of strain. When you drop your asking price by over 99% from 6 figures to 3 figures, you are not expanding your market. You are flooding it with desperation, signaling to potential bookers that you will take whatever they offer because you have no other options. This active creates a self-reinforcing spiral where each discount makes the next one more likely, where the perceived value of your presence diminishes with each cut rate appearance. Harry is not building a sustainable business model. He is liquidating the remaining value of his royal connection as quickly as market conditions will allow. The question nobody seems willing to ask Harry directly is simple. What exactly do you know about privacy, artificial intelligence, governance, or cybersecurity law that qualifies you to address professionals in those fields? His expertise, such as it is, consists entirely of personal grievances about press coverage and a vague sense that social media companies are doing something harmful. This is not knowledge, this is opinion, and not particularly well-informed opinion at that. The professionals attending these conferences have spent careers mastering the technical, legal, and ethical complexities of digital privacy. They deserve speakers who can actually teach them something, not celebrities looking to monetize their name recognition. If the speaking circuit represents Harry's desperate scramble for relevance, the As Ever brand represents Meghan's, and the Valentine's Day promotional push exposed just how badly that effort is going. The Valentine's Edit, supposedly a curated collection of romantic gifts, arrived with what critics described as utterly amateur visuals. The promotional graphics featured blurry text, off-center design elements, and an overall aesthetic that looked like someone's first attempt at using Canva rather than a professional marketing campaign from a woman who claims expertise in branding and visual presentation. Royal News Network's Brittany captured the consensus reaction when she wrote that Meghan Markle seriously needs to hire a copy editor and a graphic designer and described the general design as horrific. The site added that the effort appears officially dead and represents clearly a hatchet job by Meghan herself. Commenters piled on with descriptions of the promotional materials as a middle school cut-and-paste job with illegible font and very unprofessional execution. One observer noted the particular irony that Markle had spent years promoting herself as detail-oriented, making the sloppy presentation even more damaging to her credibility. The pricing structure of the Valentine's offerings revealed either mathematical incompetence or deliberate price gouging, neither of which reflects well on the brand. The spread and chocolate duo cost $29 when purchased as a bundle, but buying the same items individually would cost only $26. The bundle is actually more expensive than the separate components. This is not how promotional pricing works. The entire point of a bundle is to offer customers a discount for purchasing multiple items together, creating perceived value and encouraging larger orders. Meghan somehow managed to create a bundle that punishes customers for buying it, which suggests either nobody is reviewing these decisions or nobody with basic business sense remains on staff. The dysfunction extends beyond pricing to product quality. Multiple customers have reported receiving candles without wicks, rendering them completely useless for their intended purpose. When Dana Nabeline, host of the Daily Dose podcast, shared her experience receiving a wickless candle, she was immediately attacked by what she described as the worst, meanest fans she has ever encountered. She compared Meghan's supporters unfavorably to Taylor Swift fans and Candace Owens fans, noting that Meghan Markle fans are worse in terms of their aggressive response to any criticism. The fact that pointing out a manufacturing defect provokes this kind of backlash speaks to the cultish defensiveness that surrounds the Sussex brand. The candle situation alone would be damaging enough, but reports indicate that no refunds are being offered for the defective products. Customers who paid $64 for a candle that cannot be lit are apparently expected to simply accept the loss or, at best, receive a replacement that may have the same defect. This is not how legitimate businesses treat their customers. This is how operations that are more interested in extracting money than building relationships handle complaints. The long-term damage to As Ever's reputation from these practices will far exceed whatever short-term savings come from refusing refunds, but nobody in Meghan's orbit seems capable of explaining this to her. Brittany's conclusion deserves quotation in full. The only conclusion I can come to is that Meghan is starting to panic as the failure of As Ever is sinking in. The evidence supports this interpretation. The rushed promotional graphics, the nonsensical pricing, the quality control failures, and the absence of professional staff all point to an operation that is running on fumes and desperation rather than sound business strategy. Meghan apparently believed that her name alone would sell products regardless of quality, presentation, or value proposition. The market is teaching her otherwise, and the lesson appears to be a painful one. Kate Williams, the royal historian who has generally been sympathetic to Meghan, offered perhaps the most cutting assessment when she observed that selling jars of jam was not quite what I expected from Meghan. Williams recalled that Meghan was once this pioneering breath of fresh air in the palace, this pioneering kind of women's rights campaigner, from a young age. The contrast between that image and the current reality of someone confined to kitchen content and struggling to move overstock of raspberry spread is stark enough to make even supporters uncomfortable. The transformation from humanitarian to jam saleswoman represents a fall from grace that would be difficult to overstate. This is a woman who positioned herself as a voice for gender equality on the world stage, who addressed the United Nations about women's empowerment, who was photographed with global leaders discussing issues of genuine consequence. Now she films herself making food in her kitchen and tries to convince people to pay premium prices for products they could find at any decent grocery store for a fraction of the cost. The trajectory is not merely disappointing, it is a full repudiation of everything she claimed to represent. Netflix's decision not to pick up a second season of With Love, Meghan speaks volumes about how the streaming giant views her commercial potential. Remember that Netflix paid enormous sums for access to Harry and Meghan, betting that their royal connection and tabloid notoriety would translate into sustained viewer interest. The documentary series performed reasonably well initially, but the cooking show landed with a thud that echoed through executive suites. When Netflix declines to continue a show featuring someone they have invested so heavily in, that is not a scheduling conflict or a creative difference. That is a vote of no confidence in the subject's ability to command audience attention. The pattern across all of Meghan's ventures tells a consistent story. She launches with enormous publicity, trades on her name recognition for initial attention, and then fails to deliver the sustained quality or engagement necessary to build lasting success. The Spotify podcast deal followed this exact trajectory, generating headlines at the announcement, producing minimal content during the partnership, and ending in mutual recrimination. The Netflix cooking show followed the same pattern, as ever appears to be following it now. At some point, the pattern itself becomes the story, and Meghan's reputation for starting strong and finishing weak will make future partnerships increasingly difficult to secure. The question that industry observers are beginning to ask is whether Meghan has any project in her that can actually succeed on its own merits rather than on the initial curiosity value of her celebrity. The acting career she left behind was competent but unremarkable. The humanitarian work she championed was more photogenic than substantive. The lifestyle brand she is building competes against established players with actual expertise in product development, supply chain management, and customer service. What does Meghan Markle actually do well enough to build a sustainable career around? 5 years after Brexit, we still do not have a convincing answer. Harry finds himself caught between forces that offer no easy resolution. On one side sits Meghan, whose control over his daily life and public image appears nearly total, and whose spending habits show no sign of adjustment to their diminished circumstances. On the other side sits his estranged family, who possess the resources and institutional support that could stabilize his situation, but who would require something he seems unwilling or unable to provide: a genuine apology and a commitment to changed behavior. He is trapped between a wife who will not compromise and a family he cannot bring himself to approach with humility. Reports indicate that Harry has been trying to get King Charles to sort it all out, to somehow wave a royal wand and restore the financial security and family connection that Harry voluntarily abandoned. The problem with this approach is that it assumes Charles should simply forgive the betrayals documented in Spare, the accusations leveled in multiple interviews, and the ongoing monetization of private family matters without requiring any accountability from Harry in return. Why would Charles agree to this? What incentive does the king have to reward behavior that has consistently damaged the institution he now leads? Harry seems to believe that his status as son should override his conduct as an adult, and that is not how healthy family relationships work. Meghan's reported demands for any potential UK visit reveal the extent to which she remains disconnected from the reality of their current position. According to sources familiar with the planning discussions, she wants to stay at apartment 1A in Kensington Palace and have it prepared to her precise standards. Those standards allegedly include replacing all cookware, changing cleaning products, and rewashing linens with chemical-free detergents. She has requested an extensive entourage including private chefs, a yoga instructor, 2 Norland-trained nannies, and a dedicated stylist for the children. She expects the royal household to cover these costs because she believes such support is an entitlement afforded to senior royals. Let that sink in for a moment. She left the royal family, publicly accused them of racism and neglect, participated in her husband's tell-all memoir that humiliated his father and brother, and she now expects them to provide her with private chefs and yoga instructors at their expense. The entitlement embedded in these demands is breathtaking. She wants all the benefits of royal status without any of the responsibilities, all the support without any of the service, all the luxury without any of the limitation. This is not someone seeking reconciliation. This is someone seeking capitulation. The security demands add another layer of complication. Meghan reportedly wants multiple bodyguards and armored vehicles provided at royal expense, even as Harry continues his separate legal battle over police protection. The combination of demands creates a situation where every potential visit becomes a negotiation, every requirement becomes a potential flashpoint, and the family Harry claims to want to reconcile with faces an endless series of ultimatums rather than an olive branch. If Meghan genuinely wanted to repair these relationships, she would approach with humility and gratitude for any accommodation offered. Instead, she approaches with a list of requirements that suggest she sees herself as the aggrieved party entitled to compensation. Harry's impossible position becomes clearer when you consider what capitulating to Meghan's demands would cost him versus what standing up to her would require. If he supports her requirements, he further damages any chance of family reconciliation and reinforces the narrative that he is entirely under her control. If he pushes back against her demands, he risks the domestic conflict that anyone who has observed their active can imagine would follow. He has painted himself into a corner where every choice leads to pain, where every path forward requires sacrifices he seems unwilling to make, and where the status quo of slow decline may feel safer than any alternative that requires difficult decisions. The contrast with how Catherine, Princess of Wales, has navigated navigated similar territory could not be more striking. Both women faced intense public scrutiny and media criticism. Both women had to find their place within an institution that can be confining and demanding, but their approaches reveal fundamentally different understandings of what royal life requires. Catherine built relationships slowly, learned the rhythms of the institution, and developed her public role gradually over more than a decade. Meghan expected immediate acceptance, chafed against institutional constraints from the beginning, and ultimately chose departure over adaptation. Even on the specific issue of screen time and child safety that Harry and Meghan have attempted to claim as their cause, Catherine's approach demonstrates superior strategy and execution. The Princess of Wales collaborated with Harvard professor Robert Wildinger on an essay about human connection in a distracted world. She frames the issue not as a moral failing requiring legislative intervention, but as a cultural challenge requiring individual awareness and collective support. Her public appearances emphasize tactile, community-focused engagement over digital presence. She models the behavior she advocates rather than lecturing others while her wife posts their children on Instagram. Harry and Meghan, by contrast, approach the same topic with what one commentator described as an authoritarian focus on systemic reform and the extreme moral consequences of online platforms. They frequently reference children who have been harmed due to social media, using high-stakes language that asserts the best parenting in the world cannot keep children safe from these platforms. Critics argue this approach leans more toward alarm than education or empowerment, prioritizing emotional intensity over practical solutions. And it raises an uncomfortable question. How do you reconcile urgent warnings about the dangers of social media with maintaining an active Instagram presence that regularly features your own children? The credibility problem extends beyond hypocrisy to fundamental competence. When Harry and Meghan appeared on Oprah's platform to discuss Jonathan Haidt's new book about raising children with less screen time, observers noted that they appeared to be reading from notes, that Meghan interrupted Harry to insert talking points, and that neither of them seemed to have actually read the book they were supposedly promoting. Their involvement felt very shallow. Their understanding of the subject matter appeared superficial at best, and their presence may have actually deterred people from engaging with Haidt's genuinely valuable research. When your advocacy hurts the cause you claim to support, it is time to reconsider whether advocacy is really what you are doing. The Sussex credibility problem runs deeper than any single issue or appearance. Everything they do now carries the weight of 5 years of broken promises, failed ventures, and exposed contradictions. They promised privacy and delivered constant publicity. They promised meaningful work and delivered lifestyle content. They promised independence and spent years trading on royal connections. They promised to change the world and ended up selling jam. At some point, the gap between rhetoric and reality becomes so wide that no amount of PR spin can bridge it, and the Sussexes appear to have reached that point. Let me be real with you about what I believe is happening here. Every business deal, every event appearance, every product launch leads with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. That title is the entire brand. Strip it away and they are just another celebrity couple in Montecito, and not a particularly successful one at that. They did not want the job that comes with the title, but they absolutely want the title that comes with the job. Both of them should have been stripped of those titles the moment they started selling royal stories for profit. The institution they have spent 5 years attacking continues to provide them with the only credential that makes anyone pay attention to their opinions. The Megxit promise was freedom and fortune. The Megxit reality is isolation and financial anxiety. They moved to escape scrutiny and found themselves more examined than ever. They moved to build independent careers and discovered that nobody was particularly interested in what they had to offer beyond their royal connection. They moved to raise their children in peace and ended up posting those children on social media for commercial purposes. Every single premise of their departure has been contradicted by their subsequent choices, and the contradiction grows more glaring with each passing month. When you burn every bridge for money that never materializes, even a mansion becomes a prison. When you alienate every family member while expecting family support, reconciliation becomes impossible. When you lecture the world about privacy while commoditizing your personal life, credibility becomes a casualty. Harry and Meghan built their post-royal existence on a foundation of grievance, entitlement, and overestimation of their own appeal. That foundation is now crumbling, and the only person left to blame is in the mirror. What do you think about all this? Let me know in the comments and make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss the next one.